Okay, afternoon everyone. My name's Adam Voigt. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder and director of Real Schools, and there's a webinar that we're running this afternoon that is all about getting some success, getting some traction, getting a little bit of improvement with those students that often certainly impact our heart rates the most, and often our stress levels, regularly our effectiveness, and that's those students who have a tendency to become angry and aggressive. And so what we're on about today is how we can get some first steps with that, because often in schools what we find is these students can float through for years and years without the anger and aggression being treated, and indeed without it being resolved. And we all know that in schools we're in the business of building fantastic citizens, and we're certainly not helping and churning out citizens who have unresolved issues around anger and aggression. It's difficult for us because often the sources and the reasons for anger and aggression are not our fault. We're just left with the remnants of it, and we're left with the task of trying to do some teaching and learning while those issues exist. Unfortunately, and fortunately, we can be a part of the solution regardless, and that's what this webinar is all about. So, I guess before we get right into it today, we had about 60 people register for this webinar today, which is incredibly exciting. So I'm hoping we get most of those on board today. But I want to just first of all make sure that we go through a couple of key features of being involved in the webinar, just for people who perhaps haven't been involved before. First is that I just want to first of all welcome our members and partners. So Real Schools members receive every month, they get an article about teacher practice and about cultural leadership. They also get a staff meeting conversation starter, which is a short video, and the one that we're sending out to our members, I think either today or tomorrow, is all about how going to the perpetrator first instead of the victim can get you a much better result when we've got conflict. And so I want to welcome our members aboard, and I also want to welcome our partners. Our partner schools are incredibly important to us, and we make sure that they know all about these webinars. And our partners are schools that we work with over 12, 24 and 36 months, and we work together to try and build a really successful culture around the theme that they choose. So if you're new to the Real Schools world, then that's our business. That's what we're on about, and I welcome our people who are already partners. Some of the features of the webinar today. First of all is that you'll probably see you've got a little control panel there, and that allows us to interact. I am incredibly determined today that there shall be some interaction in this webinar. I've got a habit of talking too much, and that can be handy for a webinar, but it can also be a drawback because it means that I can get on a little bit of a roll, and all of a sudden I look up and I've done 59 minutes, and I haven't left time for people to be able to say what they want to say and to get what they want to get out of a webinar like this. And I do want to acknowledge that, when you're talking about anger and aggression, there's no 7 steps to fixing anger and aggression. There's no magic bullet. There's no wonderful pill that can be taken to get rid of anger and aggression. And so every situation will be different. Every context will be different. And you have the right and the opportunity today to be able to ask questions about your context. And indeed, we've already had one question come through. But on the control panel that you've got the opportunity to be able to contribute to the webinar in 2 different ways. So the first way is that you can ask a question. So you'll see that there's a section for questions there, and you can ask any question that you would like to, and I will try to make sure that today, sometimes I'll do the whole webinar thing where at the end of the webinar I'll try and answer questions. Today my determination is to keep an eye out for questions, and as they're asked I'll try to pause what it is that I'm working through and to answer those questions so that we get them answered at a time that they're appropriate to the content of the webinar. So you can use that. You also got a little feature there that allows you to put your hand up. So you'll see that there's a little hand, it looks like a hand there, and if you put your hand up, I will be able to know that there's an opportunity for you to be able to ask a question. So I'm getting a couple of questions already that seem to be a way that we might have some issue around sound. So I'm not really quite sure why that would be, but one of the things that we do have is our admin manager, Chris, online also for this webinar. So hopefully Chris, perhaps in the background here, can be doing a little bit of work about why the sound might keep dropping out. I'll persist regardless, and we will hope I'm just typing that I'm going to persist for anybody who might not be able to access the sound at the right at the moment. Sometimes these things do actually occur to us at the beginning of the webinar, and then as we get going, the audio problems resolve. Okay, so I'm just hoping that we might have some sound improvements as we get along. So, like I was mentioning, you have that hand up feature. So if you do click that little hand there, your hand will go up, and I'll know that you've got something to say. Now, I don't get an alert or anything like that when a hand goes up, so I will try to just make sure that from time to time I keep a little eye out to make sure that I'm having a good look to see whether you've got your hand up and you'd like to ask something. So what I can do in that instance is I can unmute you, and that means that I can hear what you've got to say and what you want to contribute to the webinar. We're going to make the webinar today as interactive as we possibly can, which means I'm going to ask you a couple of questions along the trip as well. We've got a couple of polls that will hopefully give us a good idea of what the context is of everybody that's involved today, and also how we might also be able to have you contribute to the webinar in terms of content as well a little bit later in the webinar. And like I said, that all adds up to us having a very interruptional intention around this webinar. So I'm very hopeful that you feel that you can be comfortable to be able to contribute. And I'm very glad that also that Robin and Alana can now hear us over at Thomastown. And so I'm really glad that I really want to make sure that today's webinar is something that you feel that you can make a contribution to as well, and to be able to get out of it exactly what it is that you're looking for. So we'll get things kicked off then, and I guess the first thing that I want to do is to make sure that I get a really strong sense of who it is that is here today. So I can see that we've got quite a few people online already. So I'm just going to ask you what hat you're wearing today. So I'm going to launch a poll here that asks you to tell me who it is that you are, and what's the role that you're coming to this webinar in today. Because what I'd like to do is to be able to make sure that we tailor a bit of the work that we do today to fit the crowd that we have. So that's always if I can get a bit of an indication that we might have more primary or more secondary, more school leaders or more people in school support or as parents, then I can make sure that we wrap some context around the content so that it works for you. So thank you very much to those people who voted. You're obviously familiar somewhat with GoToWebinar, because somehow without me even prompting you, we've gotten to more than 80% of people who have voted, which is exciting. So I'll share those results with you now. And what you'll be able to see is that we've got a high predominance today of primary teachers here. We've got a little bit of representation from middle and secondary. Got some school leaders in the house today, and we also have quite a few people in that school support role. Now, that's not unusual at all when we're talking about anger and aggression, mainly because often the students that we're talking about have some level of funding or some level of support attached to them. So what we're looking for is to put some tools and some tips and tricks in the hands of those who need to be working with those students one-on-one. Okay, that's great for me to know. Thank you so much to everyone for contributing there. I think the best way to start to get our heads around anger is to take a bit of a lap around the brain. And to be honest, one of the mistakes I think that we make when we take a lap around the brain is we're always looking at this view of the brain. So we're thinking very hard about the fact that on the left side of the brain is where we're talking about all of our logical thinking and our analytical abilities are on the left side of the brain. Boys are often categorised as being left brain dominant because they're more inclined to subjects like science and maths. And then the right side of the brain is for all of our creativity and for all of our feelings and all of our passion. And it's also where our creativity lives. And anybody who's followed the work of Ken Robinson will know he's very interested in making sure that we activate that hemisphere of our brain. When it comes to talking about anger, though, I would suggest to you, though, that this is the incorrect view of our brain to take. So if we were to take a more side-on view of our brain, then I think we start to get a more true indication of what's going on when we are angry. And really, the brain is the area that we need to be thinking most about when we're talking about anger. And And the reason for that is that the brain is the muscle with which we learn to behave. So sometimes anger manifests in our bodies, but where it originates is in our brains, and that's why it's hugely important to make sure that we acknowledge what's happening in our brains to be able to truly understand anger. Now, I'm just having a quick look here at Deirdre, who's got her hand up. So Deirdre, I'm going to unmute you and just see if there's a question that you would like to ask right at the moment. Deirdre, can you hear me? Deirdre, are you there? Okay, I'll leave that one for now then. We'll take Deirdre back off. She may have put her hand up accidentally, and that happens from time to time. So we'll continue on. So when we're talking about the brain, I think it's far more beneficial to look from side on to get a really good, clear understanding of what's going on. There are some key elements of our brain that become into clear view when we view the brain from side on. The first is the cerebellum there that we can see slightly to the back of our brain stem, I guess, and what that's responsible for is our motor skills. It controls the movement of our body, so it's an incredibly a vital piece of the brain. It is often the piece of the brain that's damaged when we're talking about brain injuries from motor accidents and things like that result in difficulties in people having to relearn how to move their bodies. The stem is an incredible part of our anatomy, and it's the very reason that stem cells are often controversially the part of research is that they're responsible for our automatic functioning, which means that our ability to breathe, our ability to blink, and those kinds of functions without having to think about it, without having to respond to any external stimuli, makes these cells in here incredibly valuable. And to be honest, just probably the most amazing cells that exist on the planet. We've also got our neocortex. Now that's the big, fluffy cauliflower looking part of our brain that we see on gross TV shows like RPA, and it's where most of our thinking happens. It's where our logic and reasoning happens, particularly on the left side. It's where our creativity happens, particularly on the right side. When we're talking about anger, though, what we're most interested in is the limbic system. This is often, as Darren Hill will point out, it's often pointed out as being the reptilian brain, and this is where three key components comprise the limbic system. There's the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, and amygdala. I'm particularly interested in what amygdala is up to. Amygdala acts in our brains very much as a traffic cop. So its role is to make sure that emotion, and limbic system being our emotional centre, is that emotion is at the core and that neocortex, for instance, is not. So there are some very key survival reasons that amygdala needs to exist, and that is that logic, reasoning, creativity can sometimes get in the way of survival. So if we go back to our cave days of if you and I were in a cave and we're having a lovely meal and a saber-toothed tiger wanders into the cave, then at that moment it's not time to go through the 15 different opportunities and to draw a mind map for what are the potentials of getting away from the tiger. What amygdala does is it dictates that we stop thinking and we act. So it's our fear centre, but it's also where our most pleasurable emotions come from, and it stops us being able to think at all. Now, why is this relevant to anger? Many people will tell me that the one phrase that gets used the most around anger, particularly after an angry outburst, is what we are thinking. And when we can understand here that the limbic system is at play and amygdala's job is to make sure that the neocortex where we do our thinking gets turned off and we just act. The truth is, when we have a really angry outburst, we are not thinking. And that's really important for us to know, is that people's capacity to reason when they are angry is far, far reduced. So it's something that we have to remember, that our expectations about the way people will respond to instruction, the way they will respond to for instance, suggestions that they calm down, will be reduced while they're angry. And also their ability to be self-aware about their own anger is quite low, because at this stage, all they're using is that dear old reptilian brain that's designed to keep us safe from saber-toothed tigers. Of course, we don't have the threat of saber-toothed tigers anymore. But this is certainly the part of our brain that is continually enacted when things like road rage happen. So what we're talking about there is, people who are successful, well in control, successful relationships in their lives, who somehow seem to be jumping out of vehicles in heavy traffic and smashing the windscreens of fellow drivers because they've cut them off in traffic. It seems completely out of character with what it is that they are and how they've been made successful, and it seems just completely at odds with that. So we ask, what are they thinking? And the truth is, they're not. So, so at that point, we need to be really mindful of the fact that we are using a completely different part of our brain when we are thinking. When we are angry. I'm just going to pause for a moment again because I've got some people who are telling me they're having some trouble with the visuals here. So I'll just ask Chris again if you can hear me, Chris. I just might ask you to have a look into why we haven't got a visual here of this slide. And what I might do is just continue to the next one. And guys, we should have an angry girl in a pink t-shirt on the screen here. If you don't have that one, then bear with me, and I'm just going to actually give that another go. And I'm hoping that despite not having a picture of a nice blue brain on the previous screen, that the description itself might have made a little bit of sense to you. I'm certainly still sharing my screen here, so hoping that you might have picked up the next picture. Okay, regardless, what I'll do is persist because the audio and the content here is definitely the more important of the things that we need to talk about today. What we need to do is to have a look at what, first of all, anger is. And there are many definitions that you could take on about anger. The one that I like the most is basically that it's a strong feeling. There's very rarely, people will rarely tell you that they're experiencing or they did experience mild anger. It's nearly always a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. So often anger is accompanied by a feeling of wanting to act in some way, and that action is something that's often a very strong feeling. So and that is accompanied again by a very strong action. So it's an intense feeling, and it's something that manifests in different ways in different people. So one of the things that is incredibly important when we're working, particularly, I guess I'm mindful of the fact that we've got a higher percentage today of primary teachers in the webinar. A really important question to ask ourselves is it okay to get angry? And this is something that causes amazing debate. I started in the work that I do with schools. One of our partner schools will know we run in-class support days where we work with teachers in the classroom. And one of the questions that I ask wherever teachers ask me to have a bit of a focus on anger is it okay to get angry? And as a result of that, I started to collect a little bit of data and started to look at how many kids were putting their hands up and saying either yes or no to whether it's okay to get angry. What I'm getting anecdotally is about 60 to 70% of our students of all ages across Australia are saying that it's not okay to get angry. They're viewing anger as a bad part of them. They're viewing anger as a bad emotion, and they're viewing it as something about which they should be ashamed or feel bad about. That's problematic because it is perfectly okay to get angry. All of us get angry, and anger, like any other emotion in our body, is something that exists for a reason. And so we're going to look in just a moment at what anger does and the reason for anger existing in our bodies. But one of the things that's really important if you're looking to try and teach anger to students is to make sure that they understand that anger is not a bad part of them. There's nothing wrong with getting angry. It's about what we do when we get angry that is important. And one thing that we can be sure of is that while they are angry is a poor time to try and teach that. We need to get in first. We need to be really proactive around anger if we want the reaction to anger to be any different. So when we look at what the benefits of anger are, why does it exist in our body? Number one is that it's incredibly motivating. Anger almost commands action. What that means is that, for us as adults, it might be that you're watching a TV story about whaling in Japan, and you might think that this is a terrible thing to be going on, and it makes you feel angry, and so you just feel compelled to want to do things about it. And so that's where we do write letters to our politicians, and we do join Greenpeace, or we do make donations, and we do whatever we can because we feel that we need to do something when we're angry. It demonstrates that you have values. People don't get angry about things, about benign things, for absolutely no reason. Usually, there's some value that has been compromised, and that results in a really strong reaction of anger. Now, as adults, this is where we can see sometimes the difference between as rational adults, as most of us are. We can sometimes tell the difference between if someone, for instance, touches our things. If someone picks up a pen off our desk and goes to use it, we won't get really angry about it. But the children sometimes will hold the existence of materials as being something that is incredibly important to them. So they will actually have that value of them, their material objects will be held very strong to them. And if someone was to touch their stuff or move their stuff or break their stuff, that can often bring on a very angry response that wouldn't happen in the adult. And the third one there is that it very much commands action. It gets us off our backsides and makes us do something, which can be really valuable. So one of the things that's hugely important is to start to have a look at how anger feels. And this is where anger really starts to do it. This is where our knowledge of using anger to get a different behaviour response from young people in particular, really comes to the fore if we're able to really understand how anger feels in our bodies. It's one thing to know what anger is at a cognitive level or to have a definition for it. It's another to be able to recognise it in our bodies. So three important points to remember here. Number one is that students are very unlikely to have any impulse control to change behaviour on only a mental cue. So, for instance, telling students that you're angry, you need to go and sit down over here, or telling them to stop being angry, or telling them that giving them just a simple instruction, go to the next room, can sometimes work, but it's unlikely to have an impact on long-term behaviour, just giving them a cue at that time. Students need to have the chance to change behaviour, and for that to happen, there needs to be a recognisable physical cue. So what we're looking for is not for them to be able to say, oh, yes, I'm using angry behaviours at the moment. We want them to be able to work out what's the physiological or what's the physical cue that they have in their body. Physical cues are only usually recognised if they're discussed prior to the event. For instance, most of us in this webinar today are likely to have very little idea of what the physical cues are of our own anger. We've been angry before. We know what it feels like roughly to be angry. We know what it looks like for other people to be angry, but we're not exactly sure where it is that we feel anger in our bodies. And I know that I certainly, even though I started to run lessons on anger with students of all ages a really long time ago, it was only really over the last few years that I started to think about what is it for me? What are the physical cues that I notice? For instance, I've now been able to work out the top three physical cues, the three places in my body where I know that I experience anger. And very clearly for me, that is in my fists for some reason, even though I'm not about to punch anybody. If I get angry about something, my fists tend to clench into a really strong fist. The other place that I feel it is in my teeth. I certainly am a tooth clencher, and I know that I will if I do get angry, I will clench my teeth and manage to talk through them a little bit. And the third thing that happens to me as a physical cue of anger is that I feel it in my chest. I'd certainly get that feeling that my heartbeat really raises, and it becomes incredibly strong for the feeling that I can almost feel that that heart pounding out of my chest. And it's incredibly important for young people to start to think in advance, where is it that you start to feel your anger? Now, about the only thing I can guarantee right now is that there's a whole heap of people in this webinar who are looking at their fists and thinking about their teeth and looking at their feet. And I do know that, for instance, my mother, when I asked my mother, where do you feel your anger? She was in her feet. And she would certainly walk into a room as when I was a kid, and if I was doing the wrong thing, she would stamp her foot and use my full name, Adam David Voigt, to make sure that I knew full well that she was angry with the behavioural decisions that I was making. So where is it for you? Where is it that you feel your anger? So I want to launch one more poll here and see if we can see if we can find out exactly where you feel your anger. I've given you 5 different options there. The first one is in your face. Is it around your teeth or the heat in your face? Is it around your body, your abdomen? Is it your heart or your stomach? Do you feel it in your arms? Often the arm muscles get really strong. Do you feel it in your skin? Some people talk about that pins and needles kind of effect, or the hair standing up on their skin. And some people talk about the temperature as well. They know they're angry when they start to actually feel a heat start to rise in their bodies, or even a cold sweat comes over them. And the great part about this poll too is that you might be looking at those and go, yes, 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 yes. So you are allowed to vote more than once on this poll to give us an idea of where it is that exactly you feel your anger. Because if you can actually articulate that, it's a really powerful thing when you start to talk with students about anger, if you're able to identify for them where it is that you feel your anger. So we've had that up there for a minute now, so I'll close that poll, share the results with you. And we can see there that what we've got is so many people here will experience anger in their face. So it's either teeth, or it's eyes, or it's heat, or it's in our cheeks, or it's that scrunching up or that furrowing of the brow that they feel anger. But then we also notice that it does get felt in other places as well. And that's the way with everybody, is that all anger will be experienced in multiple places. And we want to make sure that we know what our cues are, and that way we can talk to students about what theirs are. So I've got a funny feeling that beforehand, when there were no pictures, that I may have made the mistake of not hiding the results. So I'm hoping I'm learning about the webinar process on the run here, and that we're getting there. So I've just got a question here from Robin. When he took the poll down, we could see the slides. Now, yes, thank you, Robin and Alana. And it seems that I finally am getting the hang of this webinar thing, and it's removing the poll results allows us to be able to see the pictures, including this gorgeous angry lady there on the screen for us. So I'm hoping what you can see now is the anger rules. This is something that I guess in the positions that I've held, and I've been responsible for coordinating behaviour in schools right across the Northern Territory. I've been responsible for coordinating behaviour in my own schools. I've led the improvement of behaviour in my own schools as principal, and then in the work that I do through real schools, I've really done some scouring of what are the resources that are available when we get angry. And I keep coming back to one that's been around for quite a long time, called A Volcano in My Tummy. Now, the small percentage of people who are here today from a secondary school will probably be looking at this resource and saying, well, really, a volcano in my tummy, is this a resource I should be getting? This is not my resource at all, and you can jump onto Amazon and buy this book for yourselves. It's not a picture story book or anything like that. It's a teacher resource book. And what it is filled with is a whole heap of resources that you can use and you can adapt to be able to teach your students the anger rules. So while I found that a lot of resources that were available to teachers were about, for instance, social stories, or about trying to teach a moral, or trying to use performance, or trying to use art to be able to demonstrate anger and what we should do when we're angry, or what we could do, for instance, after the fact. For me, the thing I love about this is that it advocates a set of rules that kids can learn even by rote, and that you can refer to when they get angry if we've taught it in advance. Now, the anger rules are very simple. The first thing is that it's okay to get angry. And then they ask them to think. And it says, but don't hurt yourself, and don't hurt others, and don't hurt property. Now, for most of us, when we're relating to students around anger and teaching explicitly around anger, because what I'm advocating to you about anger is, number one, we need to teach about it explicitly. The second thing we need to do is to have a plan for how we're going to respond to it when it happens. And number three is we're going to need to have a plan for how we're going to fix things up when it does go wrong. And it will go wrong, because the truth is we're not using neocortex part of our brain when we're angry. So our ability to reason, to make clever decisions, is drastically reduced. So the anger rules asks us to follow those 3 rules of don't hurt yourself, don't hurt others, and don't hurt property. And most of the time for us, we can think about times that we have broken those rules. For instance, I always tell the story of being incredibly angry as a 14, 15-year-old that I had to get up and do my paper round on a Wednesday morning in Melbourne in July, and it was incredibly wet and rainy, and I had to deliver the big, thick Wednesday age that was always much thicker because of the classifieds. And I didn't want to do it. I asked my dad if he could take me in the car, and he said no, because he was getting quite sick of me pulling that stunt on every Wednesday morning and saying that I was sick. And he said no and made me go, and I was incredibly angry about that. And I rode at such a ridiculous pace down to pick up the newspapers that I didn't see a Coke bottle on the ground and hit the Coke bottle and flew over the top of my handlebars, taking all of the bark off my arms and legs and the side of my face. It wasn't a great deal of fun, but I managed to hurt myself because I wasn't thinking at the time. And we can also come up with times that we've either hurt other people, either if it's not physically, then certainly verbally. And we can think of times that we've made a mistake and we've hurt property, which means we've picked up something and thrown it, or smashed something, or broken a ruler over our knee, or something like that, as an example of times that we've done this. The great part about A Volcano in My Tummy is it uses story to unpack this also for students. So there's a fantastic story in there called Craig's Angry Day, about a young guy who comes from a tough home where mum and dad have split up. And you can read through this story of a boy who gets really frustrated because he wants to go to the movies when his dad says no, he needs to come over and see his grandma on the weekend, and he makes all sorts of mistakes along the way, and so do his family. And the kids, as you're reading to them, can let you know where the anger rules have been broken. And then the good part about it there is that at the end it says do talk about it. And that's a key lesson for kids, is to be able to have a conversation with someone after they get angry, and also, of course, before, to be able to resolve what's gone on. And to give them a chance to be able to make amends and to make a difference is hugely important. So when it comes to resources, A Volcano in My Tummy has certainly become my anger Bible for how we can deal with angry students, and how we can be proactive about teaching them something very simple that can be referred to when they are under pressure and when they do get angry. So when we're talking about where this fits in terms of whole school approaches to better behaviour and better engagement, we ran a webinar a couple of months ago about individual behaviour plans. We're also going to run one next year about classroom management plans. So what we've got there is an ability at the top of the pyramid for those very pointy end students to have something that we do, and then at the bottom end for those majority of students who we need to cater for every day, because you've got one teacher per every 25 or so students. What we're talking about today is a theme that often emerges in the middle there. So many of us will be able to look back on careers and say that there's been times when we've had that angry class. And, so we've been able to identify there's been a cohort of kids, often boys, and we need to be able to say, how do we respond to those themes when they emerge? So an example of that theme emerging that I'd like to recommend to you as a resource is training in a program called Rock and Water. Rock and Water's one is that it's about 3 days of training, and to be honest, it isn't cheap, but you do get opportunities in Australia. The fellow that you can see on the screen now is Freek Ikema, who developed the Rock and Water program in the Netherlands. And there are opportunities in Australia, I think still run through the University of Newcastle, to access Rock and Water training. It's an incredibly fun 3 days, but it's probably the best professional and personal training that I did over 3 days. And does it make a difference, I guess? Well, I certainly know that there's been a time when I worked in a school with a particular group of boys who were angry, and their anger was turning into aggression, because they were responsible for 6.8 aggressive behaviours per week, and the school had done a fantastic job of collecting data while they were trying certain initiatives to be able to improve that. We brought Rock and Water to that particular group of boys and taught them Rock and Water lessons for 1 hour a week for 10 weeks. Now, this sounds incredibly counterintuitive, that we'll take our most angry students and take a program and plonk them in it that's based in martial arts. So we'll teach them how to kick and punch more effectively. What it actually does is teach them how to make strong, self-respectful decisions when you're under pressure. And as a result, we found that 6.8 aggressive acts across that group of 10 boys per week came down to 2.1. So we were able to bring it down by around 300%, and that's sustained for the next 12 months too. So that was fabulous, and I was very excited about that, and told everyone about it and built a fabulous graph around it. But then a really clever teacher in that school pointed out to me that whole school aggression hadn't come down. So what we had was that effect. If I go back to the previous slide, if I go back to the previous slide there, we had the effect of of dealing with our pointy end, but having our new 12 to 15% sort of stepping up into the breach, and we were getting further aggressive behaviours as a result, and whole school aggression wasn't being improved. So we started to take the skills of the Rock and Water program more widely, and started to, instead of taking an isolated group of boys, we started to teach other teachers how to use some of the Rock and Water activities, and it was only then that we started to get a whole school improvement in aggression, and that was a really encouraging sign. And that's about identifying that if you do have a theme around angry kids, do something proactive, get them together. It's not the wrong thing to do to pull them together and train them separately. And then also some of your explicit training can definitely be in the classroom too. So when it comes to the idea of aggression towards peers, I just wanted to be able to run through. By the way, this is a presentation that you're all going to have access to. So one is that you can email me directly at info@realschools.com.au, and we will, if you would like it, we'll send you a copy of this presentation. And the other part of today is that we are recording. So we're going to upload this webinar to YouTube, and you'll have the opportunity to have that link as well. We're going to send that to you in the next couple of days. So I apologise if any of the text over the next few slides is a little difficult to access, but just know that you can catch it. You don't need to squint uncontrollably at your screen if the Thursday afternoon eyes aren't expecting you to do that. So what the research tells us around aggression towards peers is that what we should do for angry and aggressive students is to reduce their access to possible victims. One of the things that's really important is to minimise competition in that situation. So we find that one of the triggers or the antecedents for aggressive students is often being in a competitive environment. Now, there's a great quandary there in that these kids who do get angry and aggressive will often want to be in a competitive environment. They want to play sport. When we go outside to play sport, they don't want to practice kicking. They want to play a game. So when we put them in that situation, those competitive juices start to flow, amygdala gets enacted, and they usually end up making a poor decision. So keeping them in collaborative rather than competitive environments is really important. Think about the non-verbal signals and reminders that can be used in that situation when kids are getting aggressive towards other peers. So tapping, just a simple tap on the shoulder and agreeing that if I tap you twice on the shoulder, you should probably walk with me, and giving them that opportunity so that they don't make a mistake when amygdala is turned on. And then the other thing is we need to trust our gut and know that if you do get that hint that you've got that student on yard duty who is likely to blow, sometimes we get your radar goes off and it tells you that things are starting to get hairy. But for some reason we turn into police at this stage and we think that we shouldn't intervene until they've actually committed a crime. Nonsense. Make sure that you go over. If you get a hint that there's a student who's just starting to get to the edge, redirect. Go over and find them. Send them off to do a job. Ask them to go to your office. Offer them your iPad. Do whatever it takes to get them out of that situation where it's going to happen. Early intervention when it comes to anger and aggression is very important. And then the last point there is about providing constant supervision. Just making sure that if you do have hot spots in your school, reallocate a little bit of yard duty resource to be able to make sure that the supervision is really strong in that area. We spent some time in schools, wondering, whether we should use CCTV to prevent acts of graffiti and vandalism over the weekend. And then what we found out was that you could put the fake ones up and they would be just as effective. And what that's about is that supervision is one of the preventers of those negative behaviours being exhibited. The next one's going to be a little even more difficult to read, but what it's about is when we get anger and aggression towards teachers. So there's several things in here that you could have a quick look at, and I certainly won't read through all of them today. I'll go to a couple of key points, though, that might be worth looking at. Number one is to sit down if it's possible. One of the things that we do find in the way that we even anatomically approach anger is that when we get angry, we tend to stand up. So my children point this out to me, that when I'm watching a game of the Richmond Football Club playing and somebody kicks the ball out on the full when they should have kicked a goal, is that for some reason I might end up standing up and looking at the television, and my children tell me, "Dad, you need to sit down, you're getting silly." And what it's about is a response that's about, anger becoming aggression, is about standing up, making ourselves large, and trying to intimidate in a situation so that we can win. It's something that comes naturally to people. And so what we need to do is to do something a bit counterintuitive and to sit down. It implies that we're calm, and it implies that we're not going to step into confrontation at that point. It's also really important if you go down to the one that says avoiding issuing unrealistic ultimatums. So sometimes we will start to give multiple instructions to students who are angry. Now, again, if we go back to the idea that neocortex is off and amygdala is on, the ability to follow multiple instructions is going to be low. So going up to a student who's angry and saying, hey, stop that, you need to stop yelling, you need to look at me, you need to put that ball down, you need to make sure you walk to the office, on the way you need to get a drink, is going to make that an unrealistic ultimatum. And if you don't do it, then I'll be calling your mum. And unfortunately, in that situation, the response that we're likely to get is go ahead, because we're not going to be able to think reasonably about whether calling mum's going to be a problem for me or not. So that's a really important one. And then the one I really love here is to go right down to the bottom there, is to write out the agreement if appropriate. So that means that if you do have a young person who gets angry in your class or in your care, making sure that if you've got an agreement about the way that you're going to work, write it out and put your own signature on there and put their signature, and if you can, even get a parent signature on it. And if you've got, particularly if it's a person that's in your homeroom or your classroom, you can keep that really handy. And then if you see them bubbling up or you see that things are starting to get out of control, you're actually able to go over and put that little agreement in front of them. A signature implies a commitment to what that agreement is by an increase of up to 40%. So just getting that signature on there can be something that can help the student go, yeah, okay. We're not looking for a wonderful bit of compliance at this stage. We're looking for a yeah, okay, and hoping that they might redirect into another direction, or they might follow the instruction that you give them, just by reminding them that we've actually made an agreement here, and here it is. Spelling it out for them verbally at this point will often be taken as confrontation. So just popping it on the table and saying, hey, remember this, let me know if I can help, can be a really clever way to keep that agreement in place. And of course, the difficult part about working with anger is often that we're not quite sure whether it's working or not, because we will always have some level of anger and aggression in our schools. And so when we're preventing anger, we don't actually know how many instances of anger, of aggression prevention we've been able to prevent. What we do know is when it does happen. And so we need to make sure that we keep working in an incredibly proactive way. And as you can see from what's on the screen now, there are dire consequences for not working around anger and aggression. So if you go on to, if you search teacher assault, you'll find that there are nearly 2,000 results on YouTube, more than 12 million on Google Images, and in total on Google, more than 76 million. So this is very much an educational epidemic. And so it's hugely important that our educators start to get the facts around anger and aggression in our heads, because the facts and the knowledge around what anger and aggression are will arm you with the ability to behave creatively when you're under pressure. I firmly believe that if we go through and provide people with examples of how to wrangle a student or how to talk a student down or how to use defensive language, I think that's limiting. I think what we have is fantastic people in our schools, and if we arm them with the right equipment around anger, they'll start to come up with some really fantastic, creative, more importantly, contextual solutions to anger in their schools. Because as we know, each student will respond differently. I've had students who I would describe as being incredibly similar in makeup and in personality, but for some reason, completely unbeknownst to me, one responded really well to me standing directly in front of them and saying, hey, I need you to walk to my office right now. Don't say another word, turn around, walk away. And that was fine. There would be another student who, if I got in their face that and gave them that instruction, that would be an invitation into an argument. And so all I would do was walk up behind and put an arm on a shoulder and say, hey, I'm going to get you out of here. And that was enough. So certain strategies will work for some schools and will work for some classes and will work for some students, and then not for others. And it's often really inexplicable. So what we want is a strong knowledge of anger, and then use we're going to triangulate that against the knowledge that you have about your particular students and come up with some strategies that aren't perfect, but certainly give you the best chance of getting an improved outcome. So for me, if I was to give you, though, my top five, and I guess and this has been from my experience about what are the best ways to think about and also to respond to anger in our schools. Number one would be to offer the student a way out. Many people, when they talk about, in hindsight, when they talk about anger, they talk about feeling trapped, feeling like there was no other choice than to do something really aggressive. So showing a student that they do have a way out, showing them that you are interested in getting them out of this situation is really important. When that fight or flight mechanism is triggered, what we want them to do is to basically choose flight. So we want to show them how they can find a different place that they can get to. So if it's sometimes for some students, just like I said, putting that arm around them and saying, I'm going to get you out of here so you don't get in trouble, is really great, because they feel that they'll lose face if they walk away, but they don't feel like they're losing face if you take them away. Now, I certainly wasn't using any force to remove that student, but just by putting a hand on the shoulder, I was able to let them know that, hey, this is our pattern, this is what we do. It's important to remember that they want this done too. Nobody gets up in the morning saying that what I'm going to do today is I'm really going to get myself in a very angry state and I'm going to commit as many aggressive acts as I can because that's how my life gets better. Nobody does that. They would like this situation over. The truth is that when amygdala is enacted, they're struggling with how on earth they're going to come up with a solution to end this that doesn't include an aggressive act. The second thing that I talk about is using a calm and very determined voice. Now, this can sometimes be a challenge, particularly for female teachers, because it's really difficult when you're dealing with an aggressive male who's using a very strong and deep voice to be able to use a voice that matches them in some way. So it's really important just to remember those two words, I think, to just stay calm and be very determined in the way that you would in what you're asking them to do. So, like I said, I'll never walk up to a very angry teenager and say, would you like to come to my office now? I would walk up to a very angry teenager and say, I'm just going to take you up to my office now, or you're going to walk to my office now. So that sounds like a very determined thing to say, but I'm not going to screech it. I'm not going to bellow it. I'm going to make sure that I say it in a really calm but a very determined voice. Also make it really clear who it is that you're having an interaction with, and then wherever possible, deliver from their eye level. Some people will tell you that there are some cultural issues around eye contact. There are also some anatomical issues around eye contact, and that is that if you do make eye contact with people, that they know directly who you're talking to. So hugely important where you can to make eye contact and do it by getting to eye level, I find to be incredibly effective. The third one for me is to acknowledge the affect. It means showing some empathy here, not sympathy. So just about what we find is one of the very, very worst things that you can say to a student who's angry is, I know what you're going through, or I know what you're feeling, because the truth is you don't. You don't know their context. But what we can do is acknowledge affect, which means that we can demonstrate empathy. So we can see that things are tough for you right now. So what I'm going to do is help you get out of this one. Or, even if it is something that shows that you're prepared to use their angry language and say that you're obviously pissed off, don't worry, we're going to get through this one. Can be really useful, and it demonstrates that you have an understanding of what it's like for them, takes you out of a confrontational or a competitive type role and puts you in a collaborative role where the student is more likely to feel that you are on their side if you say something empathic. And so the best way to do that is to look at their face, listen to their language, and say that it seems to me that you are right now. And if that's angry or really stressed out, or it seems like you're about to make a mistake or something like that, then use that, because it shows them that you are on their side and you're trying to place yourself in their shoes. The next one is to share the plan. So for me, it's incredibly important when you get a young person who's angry, for instance, who might crawl under the table and is refusing to come out. If you are going to go in under the table to try and get them out, and I don't always recommend that, but sometimes if the siege has lasted long enough, it's time to actually nip it in the bud. The most important thing you can do in that situation is to tell them that you're coming under the table. When we surprise them and we come out of nowhere, we can expect the response of somebody who's been ambushed. So really important to make sure that you tell them what you're going to do. And when you tell them also that I'm taking you out of here, tell them exactly where you're taking them. And think about a smart place. The important thing also is to give them things that they can do rather than things that they are not going to do. So an example of that would be that, I can tell everybody here, don't, if I've got a classroom of people, I can tell everybody here, don't leave the room. And it takes no effort to not leave the room. But what we're looking for is to have something that you actually can do. So telling them, hey, just walk 5 metres with me this way for a second, and is a useful thing to do because it gives them something to do rather than not do. So telling them don't get angry, don't hurt him, don't say that are things that sure you can comply with that without actually having to go to any additional effort or to take an action. And the last one for me is that's really important is to survive. So remember remember again that neocortex is not on. This is not a teaching and learning experience. Okay, you have almost zero capability to be able to teach when somebody is operating from amygdala. So make sure that you survive. Get through it. Look after the relationship. Make sure you do things that are respectful in that situation. And then what we can do is talk about anger behaviour and, importantly, consequences later. We will often get an incredibly poor response around consequences by saying to a really angry young person with a baseball bat raised above their head, saying to them that, hey, you do that and you're going to be suspended for 4 days, will often not get us the response that we're looking for. Do it later. Take that, get amygdala turned off, get them a drink, get them calm, and then have that chat about what the consequences are for their actions. And if you can, what behaviour needs to be done to restore the situation. So restorative consequences can be really valuable in this circumstance to be able to make sure that they genuinely make amends for the behaviour that they have chosen. So that's pretty much the end of the webinar. I want to make sure that you get an opportunity to ask a question. So I'm just having a quick scan of our hand up, and if you are thinking at the moment of a question that you would like to ask, please feel free to pop it in there. I'm going to leave a few minutes to deal with some of those questions. Just wanted to mention really briefly that if the idea of becoming a Real Schools partner works is of interest for you, then step one is to get an idea of where it is that you would like to begin. That's around whether it's working with your school leaders around the leading of a successful school culture, whether it's topics like today's, which fits for me under the behaviour management banner, or whether it's around restorative practices as a vehicle for building a really strong learning community, then whatever it is, we can identify what theme it is that's going to work for you. I actually don't have any schools who have chosen one of these themes. There's always a variation on it. So there's always a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and let's title it this to get to where we want to go. The next step is to make sure that we are deciding how long it is that we're going to work together. If there's anyone online who's thinking, boy, we should do a workshop at our school on angry and aggressive students, then you've come to the wrong guy. I would like to be able to work with you, but I want to work with you over an extended period of time. And that means that we work together over 12, 24 and 36 months and bring in a whole raft of strategies and supports and resources to make sure that you get the cultural change that you're looking for in your school. So that includes transformational but also incredibly entertaining professional learning opportunities, in-class support like we did just yesterday over at Briar Hill Primary School. We also did their parent information night last night around their targeted theme, which is building a restorative school. We run some tailored mentoring for your leaders who need to be able to get support to be able to put in place the changes that they want to make. We provide lots of information through our articles and videos. We coach your teachers who hit some barriers, even 6 months after the professional learning. We run webinars like this and make sure you have lots of access to them. And we have unlimited phone and email contact support for our partner schools. So if that sounds like something that might be of interest to you, then please, just in that question box, would you just write membership? I'll start again. Just write the word partnership, and we'll take a note that you would like to be contacted for a chat about partnership. Absolutely no obligation, but if you'd like to know a little bit more about it, then we're more than happy to be able to provide that information for you. And if you'd like to know what the benefits are, then people like Sue Starling at Flinders Christian Community College, 3 large campuses across Victoria who we're partnering with at the moment around restorative practices, who are getting some fantastic results as as partners with Real Schools. So our next webinar is our last one for this year. We're going to run one on, I think we've got the 19th of November there. I'm not sure that that's the exact right date. I think it might be the 13th. But regardless, we will send you the link. And I've referred a couple of times today to restorative practices as a way to build a successful culture. And this webinar is going to be about how you can lead a restorative school. So very much targeting people who are at principal, AP, senior teacher, or aspiring school leaders in your school who might like to consider restorative practices as a way to build culture, to build community. And for me, it's certainly been something that has driven some pretty fundamental improvements in student learning outcomes. And it's that powerful. And it's something that I feel that passionate about that I thought we might throw a webinar together that we will run in 4 weeks from today to make sure that you've got the opportunity to know how that can be of benefit to you. Okay, so I think that leaves us pretty much at the end of the webinar. I'm going to do one more scan of our questions just to see where we see if we've got anybody who's got a question about anger and aggression. Deirdre had to take off, and that's absolutely okay. I'm just going to look for any hands up that we've got. We haven't got any hands up today, so people are feeling a little bit shy, and that's okay. Just know there that we've got if you'd like to follow up at all today, if you want a copy of the presentation, or if you'd like to have a chat to us about anything, all things Real Schools, then send us an email or give us a call. Check out the Real Schools website. There's lots of resources that you can get there for free. There's a survey that you can take that can help you determine a starting point for a school culture improvement, and lots of bits and pieces there that you might find interesting. Thanks heaps, everyone. Have an awesome term 4. I really hope that it wraps up well for you. Focus on those kind behaviours as an opportunity to replace those angry and aggressive behaviours, and we'll see you next time around. Okay, bye for now.